Good afternoon, everyone. I'm delighted to welcome you and thank you so much for joining us. We have a fabulous panel lined up to talk about esports. What is it and why should we be enthusiastic about it? My name is Rachel Davis, Director of Warwick Enterprise at the University of Warwick. Last month, we were super excited to announce university investment of $275,000 to set up an esports facility in the centre of campus. I think it's fair to say this billion-dollar creative industry is becoming a hot topic across the West Midlands. With the Commonwealth Games 2022 incoming, Warwick's existing track record as national champions in the university leagues, and the Coventry and Warwickshire Creative Cluster on the doorstep, now is absolutely the right time to invest in this emerging professional sport. So why haven't most of us heard about esports? Isn't it just for kids who like playing video games? No. It is, though, the competitive pursuit of video gaming and comes with all of the infrastructure of other sporting endeavours. Premier Leagues, international tournaments, athletic-style training, and a whole specialism dedicated to the broadcast and analysis of gameplay for what is an equally immersive spectator activity. But what has this got to do with Warwick? Global research into this area has indicated the positive impact that esports has on inclusion, engagement, and progression, particularly focused on STEM subjects. Esports has no barriers to entry or participation. Anyone can play and reap the benefits of engagement for their broader skill development. This builds into opportunities for employability and the creation of new jobs. And all of this innovation is supported by developments in the technology, ongoing research into user behavior and performance, as well as the introduction of new games. For us, our esports centre will focus on play, education, and innovation, not just for students, but for anyone in our region. And we're actively looking for partners who want to work with us to make this happen. So, a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. This session is being recorded and will be available on a range of different web channels after today. There is an opportunity to ask questions towards the end, but as things occur to you, please use the chat function to log those questions and also any comments that spring to mind. Your input as part of our dialogue here is really, really important. So, to the main event. I'm delighted to introduce our panel chair and host, Jack Fenton, founder of Warwick Esports Society and now consultant on the Esports Centre project. Over to you, Jack.
Hello, everyone, and thank you, Rachel, for that amazing introduction. I feel like my praises have been maybe sung too highly, but I will be hosting and broadcasting this show for everybody today. So if there are any technical difficulties, please drop them in the chat so I can keep an eye on and make sure your experience is as good as can be. But without further ado, I'll get on and introduce our panelists. I'll let them go through one by one, as you can see on the screen. So if Katie, you'd like to go first, tell us a little bit about you.
Okay, sure. Hi, my name is Katie Emery. I am the current Vice President of Warwick Esports, which is a university society at Warwick. We focus on gaming and everything esports. It's the largest community for esports at Warwick, so I like to think it's quite a big deal. But yeah, so I'm also a current student. I'm in my first year, And I think COVID has definitely allowed me to really jump headfirst into esports. So that's what I've been focusing on, as well as my studies during this year. So yeah, I'm really excited that now we've got such a big presence at the university. Yeah.
Ah, and I'd definitely agree with you in saying that Warwick is a big deal, and I'm sure our next panelist can kind of attest to that as our representative of NSE, Sam Hibbert.
Thanks, Jack. So yeah, I'm Sam Hibbert, otherwise known as Hibbo within the student community, but I'm head of partnerships at NSE, which stands for National Student Esports. We operate the British University Esports Championship, the official esports competition of British universities. We work with and are in partnership with Bucks, British University College Sport, the traditional sport governing body for universities as well. I'll tell you a bit more about NSE and the championship in my kind of section later on. But yeah, I can confirm that Warwick are the kings of university esports, back to back champions of the British University Esports Championship.
Yep, and hopefully continue to do so with this new investment. But prior to this kind of esports, university esports kingdom that has been built up, Sue was a student here, and we have Yinsi Collins here who will introduce themselves. I think I won't do them justice otherwise.
Thanks, Jack. I'm very glad that Sam has acknowledged the pure dominance of Warwick University. You know, I have absolutely nothing to do with it as an alumni. But even I remember when I was a uni at Warwick, we won a lot of League of Legends tournament. I think it was great, right, Jack? They were kind of owning everybody. That was good. But yeah, a little bit about myself. So I graduated a while ago now, 4 or 5 years ago from Warwick. I went into sports journalism initially. I didn't get an opportunity to go straight into esports, which is why I'm a little bit jealous of all the facilities that Warwick are kind of pooling their resources into now, because I feel like that definitely would have been something that I would have been interested in and helped me on my journey. But after grinding in sports journalism for a little bit, I then went into esports, and now I am a full-time esports journalist and a host for a game called Valorant, which is like a first-person shooter game. If any of you guys are familiar with Counter-Strike or Overwatch, a little bit similar, not exactly the same, but the same kind of style of game. And yeah, so in terms of a host as well, it's basically like Gabby Logan. I'm really blowing my own trumpet now, but like the Gabby Logan of Valorant. I like to think one day I'll get there. But yes, that's what I'm doing these days.
And I'd agree. I wouldn't say you're overhyping yourself at all. I think you're the Gary Lineker of Valorant. Okay.
Yeah, I'll take it.
And then also representing a commercial partner with some of the projects that are going on with at Warwick with Create Central and Creative Futures, sorry, and things like that. We have Tim Rawling. If you'd like to introduce yourself.
Yeah, hi. So I'm Tim Rawling. I'm a principal technology partner in BT's consumer CTIO division. Unlike everybody else on the panel, I've got quite a boring corporate job, but no, I actually have one of the best jobs in the world. So I get to look at the new network technology being deployed by BT and EE and look for ways to bring it to life for the customer. And in the reverse direction, look at the ways that customers are using technology and use these examples to drive innovation into our networks. So it's a crazily busy role. And at the moment, it's mostly focused on some of the exciting opportunities that 5G unlocks, including gaming and esports. And of course, BT is the sponsor of the XL team, League of Legends team. So it's all exciting.
Yep. And it's that kind of role and the way that BT are working with the university to install 5G as well that we'll talk a little bit about later today, and kind of talk about those innovation opportunities. And in terms of innovation, that's where Malcolm comes in, who runs their very own company, which they'll introduce themselves, which is an innovative technology business.
Yeah, thanks, Jack. As you just said, I'm director of Hollywood Gaming. We're an immersive technology company. And in a dissimilar way, but similar way to Tim, we look at ways of using technology to make things better, more fun, more interesting. As you probably gathered from looking at me, I'm partly in the centre of the esports community. It's a new area, but I think there's some exciting technology, and actually, in terms of creativity and opportunities at the moment. Similarly, we're looking at 5G and other technical areas to get involved in. I think there's some exciting times ahead for esports.
Yeah, I definitely agree, and that's where this panel's really quite well timed in terms of being able to talk about stuff that's just emerging, and just like the Esports Centre, which has literally hasn't even opened yet. It opened in September, so there's lots of things that are going on and that are brand new. And with that in mind, we'll start going through questions. So just for everybody at home, the way that this is going to format is what we'll have a little bit of a discussion here. Everybody will get to talk about their sector and their unique role in esports, and then we'll have an opportunity to have about 20 or 30 minutes worth of questions for everybody, which will be great. So we'll start off with Katie. My question for you is, what makes esports at Warwick special, and what is it about that supplements you and the wider members of the society at university? How does it make your experience better?
Okay. Oh, God. Okay. So I think the main thing that stands out to me when we talk about why is Warwick esports special over others would be the fact that it's a more focus on the entire industry rather than just gaming. I think it's obviously a very new industry, so it's quite hard to sometimes break away from just, oh, they're playing video games, which is very much, I mean, it's true, that's what we do, but we also do other things. So I think that's something that I think Warwick Esports is really special in, that we not only, do very well in tournaments, clearly, and, really encourage people to play games with each other and build that community, but we also allow people to have opportunities in an actual industry setting. So we do a lot of opportunities in CASP, which is content and stream production, which is a lot of obviously behind the scenes thing. Every single stream has stream production. And then we do a lot of other things, like we have data analysts that look at reoccurring trends within our tournaments and everything we do to see how we can improve how the scene is doing. So I think we have a bunch of other ones as well, but I think the key thing that stands out to me about esports at Warwick is that it really allows people to, enrich what, like, past just their studies, enrich them as a hobby, but also something else that actually gives them skills they can take on further in life. For example, I love playing video games, and I play way too many, but I also, being vice president has allowed me to also have an opportunity to work in a business setting, get more, community management roles, administrative experience, stuff like that, which has actually meant I'm now leaning more towards doing, a business, like business management in my life. So I think it really is one of those really good things that allows you to actually, take an extracurricular activity that you might not consider as you can actually do as a degree, or not a degree, but, in life as a career. And it actually allows you to do that, which I think is really special. I think the amount of opportunities that we give our members is really something really special that I don't personally see at lots of other universities. They're not quite there. We're really quite at the forefront for that, which is probably my favorite thing about Warwick in esports. Yeah.
And I'd agree as well from my own experience being part of the society, is the ability to kind of embed that community in esports generally, and that's another reason for this investment and this opportunity to create an esports center to connect people with local businesses, because there's obviously got Silicon Spa right here, all of the games developers, and some people, there's a lot of data scientist students right at Warwick. It's one of the most popular degrees, and one of the most frequent ones for esports members as well. But it's those sorts of members that may want to know how can they do more than just their degree, right? Like I'm doing linguistics and now I'm working in esports. I very rarely actually use the theory of my degree, but I apply my degree in a lot of unique ways as I go along, and it's providing more and more of those opportunities and building on those and connecting students with businesses. And that, I think my next question kind of bounce off that one, and to open it up to all five of us, is Sue, how did you find it, kind of esports taking a place in your role at university? And obviously you went into sports and then into esports in journalism, but what is it that kind of supplemented your time at uni?
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie. During exam season, I was so conscious about how much I was playing League of Legends. I forced myself not to for about 2 months. And I remember, this is completely irrelevant to your question, but I just thought it was an amusing anecdote. But I remember the day my last exam finished, because I did 5 years of work as opposed to like the usual 3 that people do. And the evening all my exams finished, like a lot of my friends went out, hitting up Casbah, you know how it is. Whereas I was like, I haven't played League for like nearly 2 months. I'm just gonna hop on a game and then maybe go out a little bit later. I ended up playing it for about 18 hours straight. And it was actually a really fun memory though, because it was where I really kind of unlocked not just like an interest in esports, but like a love of it. Because beforehand, I was kind of I did classify myself as someone that played a lot, but I wasn't massively into the physical, like watching esports side. I think the distinction is really important because even being involved in gaming and esports, there is a difference. So a lot of people would kind of see what I do and be like, oh, so you're like into gaming, you know, it's like a gaming thing. But esports is so different because a lot of that is the spectatorship and watching and the competitive aspect. And I'd say prior to going to uni, I definitely played a lot of games, but I never really participated in kind of knowing and watching the very, very top level, which I probably liken to a football fan, you know, someone who supports teams or watching the leagues and so on. And I think because I met people at Warwick who weren't just into playing it, some of them did play it, you know, competitively. We've had some amazing players, you know, at Warwick who have gone on to actually compete in external leagues as well. But meeting people and having friends who were into like the LEC at the time, I remember watching MSI. That was a super cool thing, and it wasn't something that I was ever exposed to before going to uni. And I guess the society wasn't as developed as it is now, because back in my days we just had like kind of a League of Legends society. We didn't really dabble into any of the other titles. But I think that's when I first kind of realized that how big the community is and how diverse everything is. And it wasn't just about playing, because if you didn't enjoy playing, you could watch it. And if you didn't enjoy watching, you can do other stuff. And I think that kind of snowballed into, obviously, I wanted to be a sports journalist, but I didn't realize you could write about esports players, which is very, very similar to writing about footballers, which I did for a long time. So I think having the opportunity and meeting people and learning from everybody and kind of being a part of it was so great. And like I said, you know, whenever you go out on a night out or in a pub and you meet someone who might be a football fan, you'll be like, oh, who do you support? In my case, I'm a Palace fan. And if I ever meet anyone else that's a Palace fan, it's so exciting. Like, I think everybody can relate to that. You're like, oh yeah, me too, I like Palace. And you can go off on a tangent about it. And I think that's what I found at Warwick for esports as well, because you'd meet people who were maybe mildly into gaming, and then you find out they play League of Legends, and that's really exciting because it was still a little bit niche. And then the next step is like, oh, you watch the LEC? Me too. This is great. And then not only did you kind of like were able to make friends, like I said, being able to learn about it, being exposed to the wider community, and just feeling like you're part of something. I think it's one of the best things about the esports community, and I think is a little bit underrated and people don't really talk about it.
Yeah, and I'd agree actually. And I joined the university the same year that you graduated, so that was an unfortunate.
I get it. I'm old.
An unfortunate transition of the two of us not actually getting to do anything at university like together at the same time. And it was after your kind of, you know, the foundational League of Legends society that got rebranded into Warwick Esports to become what it is now. And the motivation behind that was to connect even more people, and for even more people to make friends and play in leagues and have this network, which has grown into this kind of dynasty that it is now. And one of my favorite experiences now, just kind of generally going around and about and doing bits and pieces, is you'll see people wearing esports shirts, like football
Yeah.
shirts. It's like you go past someone in a coffee shop and they're wearing like a Fnatic jersey, and you're like, yeah, my hobby is so legitimate. Let's go. And and it's really really reassuring. And Sam, I wanted to kind of bring that over to you next and ask about how do you see that parallel between sport, since NSE is Bucks backed, and how do you see those parallels in terms of the university leagues operating?
Yeah, so kind of like go back to the point around actually at Warwick University, like what are those numbers like for the university students who are engaged in esports and those team numbers, just to put it in perspective for everyone. So there's 80 teams at Warwick University, esport teams, that took part in the British University Esports Championship last year. There's 500 students who are registered on nse.gg from Warwick University who are interested in esports. And if we're talking about traditional sport, if we're talking about football, and we said Warwick had 80 football teams and there was no pitch to play on, there'd be an absolute uproar. It's great to see that actually Warwick University are recognizing that actually people need places to play within the championship, to grow their society, to act as a community hub, to act as a place for kind of soft skill development. In terms of who kind of NSE are and those parallels with traditional sport, then we are we were founded back in 2017 with the aim of kind of creating the best university sports experience for students in the UK. Through the partnership with Bucks, British University's college sport, we act as the official body for university esports. So it's not just about providing great competition, but it's also about educating universities themselves about esports and demystifying it, challenging the stereotypes of gamers in bedrooms on behalf of the students, and also promoting the societies themselves to their own universities, and demonstrating the merits of esports. And the British University Sports Championship was designed really to kind of mirror Bucks' own offering, because we knew that actually if we have a job in educating these universities and demystifying it and making sure that people were aware of it, we have to design something that is similar to something that already exists, which is where the British University Sports Championship comes from. So universities will submit as many teams as they like through their esports societies. They compete in 10 different esports titles, and they earn points for their university, depending on where they place within the championship, and then that represents itself as part of the British University Sports Championship points table at the end of each academic year, where one winner is crowned the Esports University of the Year, which has been Warwick for the last 3 years. So we coin Warwick the Loughborough of university esports. So there are still ties back to traditional sport. So yes, it's that there are parallels there, and it's just great to see that Warwick are making that investment on campus.
And my follow-up question for you, but I think in order to kind of keep everyone involved, I was going to open this one more to Malcolm, because we've had some discussions about audience involvement, and obviously we discussed already very quickly onto the parallels between sport and esports. And one thing that's really exciting about esports, and this may on paper not sound exciting when I use these words, but it's the data access that you can get from esports that you can't get from traditional sport. In terms of, if you imagine, you continuing to use football as a metaphor, they're playing in a physical space, right? And they're kicking a ball around. In terms of tracking every time a ball's been kicked, developing those ways of recording those things and then making the fans feel like they really can understand the gameplay, it's a lot harder than in esports, where you have accessibility to these things because it's happening in a virtual space where it's being recorded, and that allows you to go into really deep analytics and talk about these sorts of things. And I know, Malcolm, your work is working towards kind of providing opportunities to feel more embedded in that space and understand those things better. So maybe if you could tell us a little bit more about how you see the future of esports viewing experiences going.
Well, yeah, happy to do that. I think, it could be clear, I think we're a technology enabler. So um, I don't think it's for us to tell esports how it evolves in that area. And from this panel, I'm just as interested in learning about, kind of the things that people engaged actively in esports are really interested in. But you gave me a really interesting insight into esports players. And it's like, I'm a massive sports fan. I consume an enormous amount of hours on watching and looking at various different sports activities that are going on. How many of those do I participate in? I play golf occasionally, and that's literally it. And that's very different in an esports environment where you've got players are not only watching, but they're actively participating as well at the same time. So the analogies are somewhat different between the two groups. I thought that was interesting insight for me. In looking at sports, we're looking at sort of how do we make the fan engagement piece a bit more enriched. It's kind of like the bragging rights, so if you are that Crystal Palace supporter and you're playing another team and you're not doing so well, it's that halftime conversation where you go, well, of course the manager got it completely wrong. And if only so player in that position, things would have been a lot better. And we're starting to get towards positions where using things like AI, we can start to democratize almost the data, which I think is going to be so important in esports, to allow esports players to go, how the hell did he get that through that section so quickly? Or how did he manage to shoot so quickly? What were the things that he did that I absolutely cannot do? So I think there's the data piece can provide actually some interesting insights, but in perhaps a different way. And I think potentially one of the challenges is getting access to that data, because again, you use the sports analogy. Well, everybody is running around, they've got Hit on, which is pouring out huge amounts of data. The issue is more how to get access to that data and then use it in a way that fans can have a more enjoyable experience. And the same sort of applies in esports. It's how do we get access to, there's a lot of telemetry data which obviously exists within the games themselves. How do we get that and use it in a broadcast way that's so interesting and interactive for users? So there are other areas that we can go on and talk about in terms of immersion and immersive technologies, particularly I think when viewing live events, but I just wanted to bring that one out first.
And I'm really happy you brought that up. Actually, it was one of my first experiences of taking esports to wider audiences. Is I did research in my first year at university on esports team communication, and I got a grant from the university to continue doing that. I actually went to the EU LCS is what it was called at the time, the European League of Legends Championship in Berlin, to watch, make field notes, meet with some players and teams. And I came back and wrote a research paper which I took around to some conferences, and I'd open my conference by saying, how many of you follow any sport, just any sport whatsoever? And the whole room was almost unanimous. So all academics all put their hand up. And then so how many of you actually play that sport that you'd call yourself a fan of? And it was about 20% at max amount of people. Whereas if you come to an esports audience, the amount of people that just watch is in the minority instead of the majority, and you get a much more involved audience. And one of the funny anecdotes that I've used with other people before is saying, like, you don't get that oh, I could have scored there discussion, like you do in football. It's like, oh, just put it in the goal, because almost everyone who's watching actually understands how difficult some of those mechanics are. Obviously that doesn't stop people complaining regardless. I mean, that's the role of the fan to a certain extent, but people understand how difficult things are, and when you see a top player do something that is just amazing and almost unexplainable, all the fans know firsthand just how difficult that was, and it creates the sense of excitement, is even more so than what I've seen in football, which is really, really quite exciting. And I guess, Sue, you could probably kind of give us your insight on how you've seen fans interact with teams and players, and how involved audiences in esports tend to be.
Yeah, I mean, Call of Duty fans be crazy. Like, if you guys ever go to a COD event, it's literally like going to a Millwall game. They're very lively. They also do make some of the best events having those fans. But I think another thing I just want to add on top of that in terms of interactions with pro players as well, I think it's one of the better done ones in terms of it having access and being able to kind of get to your favorite player, but as a football fan, like the likelihood of Wilfried Zaha ever knowing who I am or interacting with me or seeing any of my support and messages, it's next to zero. Like it's very unlikely that he's ever going to be able to acknowledge my undying love for his football mechanics. But on the other side, like even if you want to have access to someone as big and as high profile as someone like Nadeshot or maybe Ninja, I'm just naming like the more kind of more mainstream ones in case people aren't super familiar of the like intricate League of Legends or Valorant players. There is ways that you can support him outside of support them even outside of just being a fan of their work. Like you can go to their streams, you can sub to them, you can interact with them, you can talk to them on social media. I know Nadeshot usually is pretty good with kind of acknowledging people in that way, at least historically. I feel like maybe Ninja is like too famous at this point, but even then there is a way to be able to like speak to them on Twitch, and I think that's one of the reasons why we're seeing such a massive influx of, I guess, mainstream like endemic celebrities or athletes or singers kind of move over to gaming a little bit and to esports, because I don't think anyone else would be able to have access to Neymar the way they would on Twitch. As opposed to like in real life or even on social media. And I think one other person lately I've had the pleasure of just getting to know is Jordan Fisher. He's an actor and a singer on Broadway and a very, very talented one. And he's really involved in Valorant. And through that, he's been able to kind of engage with a whole new demographic of people who might not know him as an actor or as a musical theatre person, but they know him as a celebrity who plays Valorant, and he streams really regularly. He sings on his streams. And I think this is the kind of community that you don't get in traditional sport. You're never going to get that. It doesn't matter how big of a fan you are, and doesn't matter how involved you are with your club, you're never going to have a similar feeling as a Twitch community, which is why I think we'll probably see more and more and more. And I would be very surprised in a few years' time if, Premier League footballers and athletes from other sports aren't all streaming on Twitch.
Yep. And we've seen that kind of actually with the F1 in particular is a really good example of how some of the F1 drivers, when lockdown came in and they couldn't race, they went straight across to Twitch and built up a really quick integral kind of community really, really quickly. And that's ended up creating a real buzz around this coming F1, which I've not actually seen for years. Actually, a lot of young people and a community that F1 were really struggling to reach have all of a sudden dove into this sport that was actually struggling with audiences, but now are gaining a whole new influx of young viewers because they're huge fans of different people who have been streaming on Twitch, because it was so much more accessible to them as young people. And that's just so exciting to see in the form of embedding audiences. And so I wanted to kind of come around to the question that I had in mind for you today. Is about what's the reason that you kind of chose this pathway in terms of coming into esports? I know that's a deep question, but I think it's a really good question for people who found their way through. And I know actually what we've just been talking about is the answer as to why I've pursued esports after graduation and pursued and put so much time into it while I was at university, is because the community is so embedded, and it's so easy to meet people and make friends and feel like a part of what you're doing. Actually, I started as a sports person and then came into esports, and I felt so distant from it, but I don't know whether that's different for you.
Well, my dad always said to me when I was growing up to find something that I really love and find a way to get paid for it. So, like it doesn't have to be a quote unquote like viable career option, but if you find something that you really, really enjoy doing, it could even be a hobby. And if you can find a way to get paid for it, then you're going to be set. Like your life is going to be pretty smooth sailing, so to say. And I would say that my first love was probably film and movies and TV, which is why I did a film degree at Warwick. But sport was always something that was it didn't feel like a real career option for me. It was something that I really loved and I've loved my whole life, not just football. I watched literally anything and everything. Maybe not cricket, but that's a whole other conversation. But for me at uni, when I realized I couldn't realistically pursue something in film and TV because I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do, I thought, oh, sports could be a good avenue, and I'm just going to see if there is something there for me to realistically, make money, because that is the biggest concern, I'd say, for so many graduates. I think definitely in my year, a lot of people weren't 100% sure what they wanted to do, and people always worried about what can I do to make money, because after you graduate, the world seems like a scary place, especially if you don't have a plan. So my plan was kind of like convert into journalism, go into sport and see where that goes. And I think I was incredibly lucky because I did 5 years at Warwick. So when I graduated, I was a little bit older and I wasn't so massively into kind of going out and socializing and stuff. So I really got my head down during my time trying to get my journalism conversion. But during that time, like I said, I was a really big fan of esports, just purely as a spectator, and I loved watching it, and I watched it just as much as I watched the other sports. I never missed, as you mentioned earlier, the EULCS at the time, and then it kind of became the LEC, but I never missed any of that. I never missed Worlds, I never missed MSI. I was very much into my esports. So for me, it was like, well, I'm trying really hard to get into football and get into sports, but I couldn't really see that big of a distinction between that and esports, right? It's super, super similar. And I had a very similar feeling when I was kind of watching and become integrated into the scene. And it just happens that, as you guys would all know as well, a lot of like endemic brand and media as well were trying to get into esports and still are. And I just got a little bit lucky that the place I was working at the time, Sky Sports, they were somewhat interested in this beast, I guess, of gaming and esports world. And they wanted to kind of test and dip their toes, but they didn't really want to pour a lot of resources into it. And I was this very kind of energetic and passionate person who just wanted to try everything. And I wanted to sort of get myself ahead. And of course, being someone who actually knew about esports, I was like, oh, I can write about esports for you. I can kind of take on the jobs that none of the other writers wanted to do. Of course, when you go to Sky, you want to cover big events. You want to do the World Cups and Premier League and so on. And if your editor is like, hey, here's a story about the CS:GO major in London, can you write about it? You're not going to be that interested. But fortunately, I was. And I didn't realize that there were writers out there. I think in my early days, I was exposed to like the on-air talents, so Shocks and Medic and Vedias and Deficio at the time. I was really exposed to these people, but I was never exposed to journalists or people that wrote about everything that was going on. And I think once I kind of saw that there were legitimate websites and there was people who were writing about these games and personalities and features and everything that you'd find in traditional media, I kind of felt like, well, I could give this a go, really, because this is really transferable to what I was already doing, writing about football and so on. So I kind of gave it a go. And I remember my first story, proper kind of like featured interview series and story, was about the Fnatic Rocket League team. I wasn't super into Rocket League, but I watched enough of it to kind of know what I was doing. And it was so fun, and I had a lot of creative kind of direction in what I wanted to do. And then over time, I found myself doing more in esports than I did in sport, and kind of the scales just slowly became much more weighted into esports. And eventually I just felt like I was doing enough and I knew enough and I was passionate about this enough that I wanted to give it a proper go. I think I'd be doing myself a disservice and I would regret it if I didn't fully commit to something like this. Well, I kind of picked a bad time to do this because I went freelance in February 2019, no, 2020 even, February 2020, like a month before the pandemic and a month before like everything was shut down. So it was a little bit bad timing here and there to kind of throw myself fully into it. But then, as you guys know, with the blessing of hindsight, the gift of hindsight, it turned out to be a great year for esports. Yes, we didn't have LANs, we didn't have events, and everything kind of got thrown off a little bit, derailed a little bit, and we didn't know what to do. But ultimately, it kind of gave us the creativity, and we had a lot of eyeballs on us, you know. I think deals were made and sponsors were secured by loads and loads of big organizations in a year where everywhere else was losing money. All of the other entertainment products were in panic mode, you know, like cinemas weren't open, people couldn't release their movies, football was paused for like 7-8 months, we had the Olympics delayed, the Euros delayed, but in esports, yeah, we didn't have a LAN event for League of Legends Worlds, but because of the way the game is, and because of the way that Riot were able to facilitate everything as well, it went ahead and it was insanely successful. Valorant came out, and this event, you know, on their first LAN event, I think 2 weeks ago, they reached 1 million views, and I think it took even League of Legends and CSGO a long, long time before they had a tournament that had like 1 million viewers for one final. So I think it was also a good time for me to commit, and like I said, for me, it was a slower process. I kind of dipped my toes in the beginning, and then I fell in love with them more and more, and then it became more viable as time went on. So I was lucky I could kind of then let sports go a little bit and commit to this. But I think I also understand reservations from other people, because for a lot of people, committing into esports means like uncertainty. Like you don't know, as a freelancer especially, like you're not quite sure if you're ever going to get paid to do what you love, or you're not quite sure how long this can kind of go on for. So I definitely think I was lucky that I had the option to start 1 day a week, then go 2 days a week, then 3 days a week, and now I'm 7 days a week. But I do also feel like the beauty of esports is that there's so much to do, and I think as long as you're someone that is willing to kind of try everything a little bit and be open-minded, I think the opportunities here are way bigger, and there's way more of it than any other traditional media that I've been a part of.
Yeah, and that's a really good transition as well for us, actually, because the excitement of esports, especially during lockdown for the whole world in terms of viewership, is incredible. You mentioned that Valorant hit 1 million in its first ever major event, and the League of Legends World Championship hit 4 million again, actually, and those sorts of numbers just continue to crank on. And that's actually the question I had for Tim, as is that, you know, as you're here with BT and all of that, what are the opportunities that you see for these large organizations, and both endemic and non-endemic? We've got people joining from all sorts of scenes, but for you, what is it that seems exciting to these bigger companies? And you know, you said there's all this buzz around esports, and where do you think that buzz is coming from a corporate kind of perspective?
So this is bigger, older companies that have been around since the year dot. It's all very new for them.
Yeah.
So, but no, BT is about more than just home telephones these days.
Yeah.
Anyway, we sponsor Excel, and for those that don't know, BT Excel Esports, they're a British esports team who compete in the League of Legends European Championships and Northern League of Legends Championships. We, as BT, provide the connectivity and infrastructure at Excel's HQ and training facilities, so that helps the team to stay connected and perform at their best. And as the UK is becoming an increasing nation of esports fans, our partnership with Excel Esports demonstrates the power of BT broadband for gamers. We've long been associated with more mainstream sports, such as, well, particularly football. BT is the sponsor of the football associations of all the home nations. And we're actually starting to see some of the gaming technology crossing over into that mainstream arena. So things like AR, VR, volumetric video capture, other technologies. And it's great for moving away from that single camera view that you get in sort of normal sports into an experience that's far more immersive. And I think Malcolm was sort of alluding to that earlier. So anyway, BT, seen as the old dependable network provider, and we're particularly trusted by the older generation. One of the jokes within the organisation is that we are very much Saga Telecom, which is entirely pejorative. But sponsoring esports attracts a very different demographic for us, and hopefully a very different customer base to our network. It allows us to showcase some of the lesser appreciated parts of our fixed and mobile networks. I should have mentioned earlier, BT isn't just BT broadband, but we also own the EE network, and we've been spending the last 2 years rolling out 5G to the UK. I think we were the first 5G network to launch, and we have now rolled out 5G to just over 40% of the population, I think it is. And traditionally, we've sold all those services on the basis of speed. But esports especially is highlighting a need to us to compete on latency and reducing jitter. You'll know that if you're playing a game, it's all about the jitter and keeping your ping times down, all that sort of thing. So for us, it's a really positive use case that allows us to demonstrate and deliver network leadership. And that's actually been really important over the last year, because along with everything else, all of the main tournaments moved off their LANs into the online space. And that brings the telcos in that we need to keep everybody connected. So for us, being involved in esports is also helpful to our own network planning. We've got that new focus on gaming issues within the network, and we're actively monitoring our customers' gaming experience, whether that's our customers playing online games, or whether they're watching esports through platforms such as Twitch. And we're also a lot more aware of issues arising from unexpected or uncoordinated game downloads. And we've started building new capability into our network, particularly caching capability, which is a completely unappreciated bit of our network resilience. But it's that affiliation with esports, it's really bringing it to the fore for us. So it's driving that innovation into our networks. And once we've got 5G in particular built out to full capacity, then that potentially offers esports new opportunities of gameplay through AR and VR. Perhaps not for League of Legends or Valorant and things, but new things coming down the track, and potentially untethering players from the workstations without a loss in network performance. And there's all sorts of new exciting technologies coming along. So you've got edge computing. This could potentially allow you to put really powerful GPUs in the cloud, maybe even closer to the viewers, maybe bring new ways of allowing fans actually to stand shoulder to shoulder within the game with their gaming heroes. So yeah, it's really exciting. And as I mentioned, the gaming innovation is also spilling out of esports into more traditional sports, so giving new augmented ways of watching football, for example. I think Jack mentioned earlier that there's more data available for esports than sports, but ideas are starting to cross-fertilize across the two to improve the viewing of real sports like football. So we launched something called Matchday Experience on BT Sport last year, which gives you sort of pinch and zoom, names and stats superimposed on players, ball velocity tracking, and we're using all of that telemetry data to really give a far more immersive real sports experience for football and other things. We've got other projects on the go with the DCMS 5G Create at the moment, which is looking at boxing matches and using volumetric video to gamify those as well. So yeah, I mean, the sponsorship and its involvement with esports through Excel, I mean, it's been massively beneficial for BT. Yeah, that's about it. Other than somebody mentioned jerseys earlier, and I want a BT XL jersey. I've made a note. Need to stack myself one of those.
They've got a really...
So yeah, it's been great.
They've got a really nice jersey at the moment as well. It's like really kind of retro with like asymmetry and stuff like that as well too, which is...
They have, but it's really corporate. I'm just wondering if I could get away with wearing it in the office.
That's true. I mean, technically you've got your logo on, right? So...
well, that's what I was thinking.
And yeah, I wanted to like bounce back to Katie and kind of bring some of those things that we talked about that Tim just brought to, and how important it is to you as like I guess I mean as the youngest in the room, but also as a student currently, how important it is to have these features like ping and bandwidth and features like that. And I know we'll come back to 5G and talk about that a little bit more. And I know one of the main benefits of 5G is the bandwidth that it provides, and the ability to have stuff in cloud. But how important has that been to your experience in house buying, university experience, etc.?
Yeah, so I think it's something that, a lot of people know kind of what it is, but not as in depth. So, oh, this Wi-Fi is really slow, but you can't really ever properly gauge it. So for next year, I'm living in a house of 14, which is a lot of people. And, we've been having discussions about Wi-Fi, and I've been quite nervous because I'm the only proper gamer there. And I know how important it is, especially with 14. So, there's people, it's quite hard to explain to other people, guys, I really need good ping, this bandwidth, I really need it, it's really hard to explain it to the average individual, because they don't necessarily have as much of a gauge. It's more of just will my page load? Yes. Okay, fine. It's quite hard to explain to people the necessity to actually, do your job or just, play the game that you want to play. So I think that being a more recognized thing that we'll be able to have around the campus and also, in the center, would be really, really beneficial, because I know a lot of people struggle with it and can't play. We have a few players. It's not as big of an issue if they're in uni accommodation, which obviously I was this year as a fresher. But we do have players that can't for internet reasons. Physically, they just keep lagging out. They can't play the game. They can't join in these teams, which is really sad. And we do have players that struggle with that. So I think, by adding all this infrastructure, especially, around campus and around our center, means we'll actually be able to give people more access. I think it's something you don't really realize in in the UK, we're very good for it pretty much. But a lot of people, you still have people who, for whatever reason, can't actually access this because they just don't have the infrastructure. And I think that's kind of overlooked sometimes, because you just assume everyone has it because it's Wi-Fi, right? It's broadband, everyone's got it. But, it can be difficult to realize actually how important it is to a lot of people. And, it's like the stigma with it, right? If I say to my mum, Mum, the Wi-Fi is too slow. She's like, no, the Wi-Fi is fine. No, Mum, actually, it is physically too slow. It does not work, Mum. It doesn't work. And it's so difficult to explain to people that, you actually need this to do what you want to do. And I think that becoming more, people more aware of that really opens up doors for a lot of things that aren't just gaming as well. It just opens up a lot of doors. I think esports is a really great way to show it, because obviously esports uses so much broadband. But I think it's a really great way to open the doors to people, that infrastructure is there and it's becoming way more available, and it's allowing a lot of people to have more access to esports industries and gaming in general that they weren't able to before. So I'm really excited about it, that way. I'm very excited about 5G. Let's go. But yeah.
Can I come back in there? So
yeah.
I mean that's absolutely music to my ears. That's the sort of conversation that I'm having internally, and it's all been about speed in the past, and now it's about what do people want to do with it, and people want to game. And you've got 14 people in a house, and I'm having conversations internally about, right, so the gamer, how can we prioritize their traffic over the Wi-Fi, so that make something work for them, because it doesn't matter if we slow down somebody's cat videos slightly, but the gaming traffic absolutely has to be out into the internet immediately. And we're having these conversations internally, and even these trusty old engineers who all they know is telephone calls are starting to talk about this and actually get interested. So rest assured, we are on it within BT, and I would say that our latencies on the fibre network are second to none in the UK. So I would go with BT.
All right, I'll consider it. I'll put it in my group chat. Don't worry.
I saw you nodding away as we were talking about that, Malcolm, and about kind of not just the need to expand things to accommodate for esports, but also the accessibility and innovation highlights that are coming from the esports user base. And that was the question I have for you about what this new world's so interactive and so hands-on and so fast-moving. And yeah, how do you see those opportunities evolving? And tell us more about the stuff that you're doing or working in that area.
Yeah, and I think it's good kind of following on from what Tim was saying, because, to be honest, without that sort of backbone network for people like us, it makes it unbelievably difficult. But a lot of the innovation that's coming in is really starting to enable particularly things around more immersive pieces. So we're doing a lot on multisensory applications, and particularly live. And I guess if you're kind of translating that, that could be in a sports analogy that you have kind of 3D cameras operating in stadia, complete with 3D audio, maybe other sensors as well, where you could view that in VR. And so you feel as though you were right there in the stadium, kind of watching that game. And obviously, the translations across into esports. And again, I know, Jack, we had this conversation where you talked about participation in esports between genders is actually quite even, but it's not when it comes to attending live events. And kind of interested to why that should be, but also what can technology do to help enable opportunities for people to choose where they sit virtually within the stadium and enjoy that experience, whether they want to be in a more family-oriented enclosure, or whether they feel more comfortable with being sort of virtually sat with, say, a more female gender. But all of those are opportunities. And also, how do we cope with people with disabilities? How do we bring them in so they're not left behind, so that we can work with various different tools that allow them not just to watch but to participate. And I think there's an awful lot of enabling technology, and much of that will stem from what 5G can bring to the party. So the rollout of 5G is actually really important, and some of the pieces that Tim just talked about in terms of having applications in the cloud and being able to draw that down, particularly when you start to look at things like augmented reality. The advent of augmented reality glasses, kind of what's happening with those at the moment. Apple announcing that, well, perhaps not they announcing, but the world announcing that augmented glasses will be coming out. The Apple UI is bound to be really, really good. But it's the tethering and how to do that, and the obvious device is the mobile. So more and more applications, consumer-based applications, coming into the 5G arena, I think are going to be really exciting over the next couple of years.
Yeah, and I think that esports accelerating that path as we've discussed, and you brought up a really important topic, and I want to continue on that in terms of making esports more accessible for people of different backgrounds and of different genders and sexes. And I think within university esports, I'll come to you, Katie, first to talk about how you feel that's happening in uni esports, and then Sue, about your experiences in that kind of broadcast and in stadiums, because a lot of this discussion from especially Malcolm with your ideas of virtually kind of attending stadiums, you've had first-hand experience of being on these desks of what are effectively virtual stadiums, because there's not been people in those at the moment, and how that's evolved. So we'll come to you, Katie, first for that.
Yeah, so I think I'm relatively new to the industry. I did a lot of gaming, in like school, at my school ages, but I actually haven't got really into esports industry until I came to uni in September. So I haven't actually had the not COVID experience. So that's definitely different for me, because I can't really comment about, being, a minority at events or anything, because I haven't been to any in person. But it definitely is something I'm aware of. I know we've already discussed that esports in terms of genders is pretty much 50-50, but you just don't, it's not quite as reflected. I don't quite know. It's definitely harder to find the women, the women. am currently the only female on our executive board for the society. And there aren't that many in our society. It's definitely something we're trying to work towards. And I really think that having the centre and having a physical place that people can see what you're about much more easily is definitely less daunting. And I really do think that that's going to help us improve our inclusion and the accessibility for other people. Because even though it is 50-50, you know, you don't really see it as that way. It's very much from, you know, from the offset a male-dominated industry, or at least it looks that way for a lot of people who aren't in it. So that can be really difficult to, you know, get people's foot in the door, you know, the barriers to entry because of people being afraid that they're not going to be as included. So I think that was something that I was quite worried. I was worried about it. I was definitely scared when I joined uni. I was like, oh gosh, it's a bit terrifying. But I've actually had a really welcoming experience. I think in general, Warwick University are great for inclusion and everything surrounding that. I've never had any bad experience in esports or otherwise. So I really think Warwick Esports is really good at that. And I think being able to have this at university, which kind of gets your foot in the door for the industry. You know, I can only imagine it was scary for me joining esports at university. So then for those, you know, Yinsu that had to then join it after university and just go straight into the industry, I can imagine it's easier than it ever has been now. But having this foot in the door for, you know, you at university kind of makes it easier. And I think we'll see a lot more diversity within our community now, and hopefully within the industry, because, you know, as times develop, I'm hoping that inclusion will be improved. And I'm really looking forward to it, to be honest. I'm looking forward to a day where I'm not the only woman on the team, and more women feel they can. You know, I don't feel excluded. I don't feel as though women cannot join the team, but we just don't. I don't feel there are as many women that feel like they can. I think that's the main problem, is giving people the encouragement and motivation to feel as though they have the space, because they are definitely, like, some of my favorite esports personalities are women. So I'm really hopeful that we can open that door for them more, with the university and in the industry in general. Yeah.
And Sue, I saw you were gonna jump in, so I'll just let you go.
Yeah.
Follow straight up.
Yeah. I mean, let's not sugarcoat it. There's a huge problem with diversity. I think there's a huge problem with diversity in many aspects of the entertainment industry and life and in general. And as someone who came from sports, which admittedly was a lot worse than esports and gaming, even though it's a little bit better than what I was used to, I guess, in sport, it doesn't mean it's still kind of there yet. I mean, you only have to look at a talent lineup, not just when it comes to genders and sexes and so on, but just diversity in general. I mean, looking at the lineup of any broadcast, because that's kind of what I have more experience in, you'll see, you know, some similarities, some differences, some issues just by the talent lineup. I mean, even that in itself is hugely problematic. And I've kind of been fortunate that I've been able to work with some amazing women and some amazing people of all sorts of background, and it doesn't have to be like a visual diversity. I think that's the other thing we need to that isn't spoken about enough. That is not just about what people look like. That's the surface of it, but we kind of need to pay attention to the nitty-gritty of it. But like I said, fortunately, I've worked with amazing people. You know, I work with Pansy on a regular basis. I'm learning so much from her, because when she was casting Counter-Strike, there weren't many women casting to begin with in general. It's still now. Women aren't really, it's really, really hard for women and girls as well to get into casting, because you're kind of expected to be a host or expected to be an interviewer. I mean, I'm a host and interviewer by choice. I love what I do. I wish I could cast. It's such a difficult thing to do. But for someone like Pansy, for example, you know, she kind of is the kind of figurehead of women in casting. But the problem is she's been a figurehead for over 10 years. So there hasn't been enough women casters in the last 10 years other than Pansy. Like, that for me just feels preposterous. And it's not because women aren't casting. I know so many amazing tier 2, tier 3 casters, but they're not breaking into tier 1. And at some point, even if what I'm about to say isn't the truth when it comes to every scenario, but at some point, if you are a tier 2 female caster and you're watching all of your colleagues who started casting later than you, or you're watching other people kind of surpass you in your careers, you're going to have to think about why that is. And I honestly, 9 out of 10 times, it's not because they're not good enough. 9 out of 10 times is because those opportunities, even in 2021, is still quite limited. I've definitely been passed over for jobs before. I've been told last year, I've been told in the last 12 months, going for, a Valorant hosting job, that I didn't fit the look of the broadcast. And then when I realized when I saw the person they ended up going with, I was like, okay, I see what you mean by not me fitting in the look of the broadcast. And that is going to happen to you. That's the sad thing, because one of the messages I get sent the most are from girls and women in the scene who don't know what to do about the kind of the barriers they're facing, or they're just simply messaging me saying, oh, thank you so much for sticking up for us on Twitter, or thank you so much for speaking out about X, Y, and Z issues. And it breaks my heart, because some girls don't feel comfortable speaking out because they feel like it's either going to limit them or it's going to typecast them and put them into like a category where they're going to be like a token hire, So there are so many different things that are going on, and it breaks my heart seeing people like, oh, I agree with you, but I'm really afraid to kind of speak out with you because I don't know the consequences, because I don't have these securities. Again, like I have been a little bit lucky in that sense. But again, it's not just for women either. I know a lot of men also feel a similar way. There's definitely a lot of issues that aren't being addressed right now, and people from all different sorts of backgrounds, even accents. Like, it blows my mind for me that some people are discriminated by their accents, not by their knowledge or by what they bring to the table on a broadcast. And there's so many different, like I said, aspects to this issue. Not going to get solved anytime soon. But just circle back to what Katie was saying, I think for me, everyone I have met in gaming at university or outside of it, and esports as part of the community, I've rarely ever come across anybody that is discriminatory or expresses like any bigotry opinions. But I think the issue is that a lot of the people that are in power and a lot of the people that are in charge are either perhaps a little bit out of touch, or they're not, whether it's personal biases or anything, they're not really doing everything they can to make a healthy environment for everyone else. But luckily, we have so many amazing people in the scene, from the bottom up, to a degree to the top, that are trying their best to try and change things, and are kind of doing everything in their power to make sure that we do create a safer and healthier environment. I appreciate the stats and stuff, like 50%, 50-50, but I think it's so misleading, because it's almost trying to like push us into feeling like we can't address a glaring issue. And like I said in the beginning of this monologue, we can't sugarcoat it. Like, there's a problem and we have to just keep working at it.
Yeah, and I'm so thankful that we were able to talk about this and that you brought it up, because I think it's something that I've actually personally learned a lot from you. I do my reading, try and contribute things, and one of the things that the centre will be focusing around is providing opportunities for women in esports, including scholarship programs and things like that. But it's not just those issues and things that have been swept over under just because of the speed of esports, right? It's grown so fast that some of these things that on paper it should fix, because you come in with a relative amount of anonymity in esports when you're a player, and it's that anonymity that leads to a lot of horrendous behavior, which I know you're particularly outspoken about, Sue, and something that everyone should be particularly outspoken about, honestly, and things like that online, because you can hide behind an alias. But another issue that presents is young people in esports, and that's one of the first two questions that we've got as we head into the question part of this panel. Is a question from Jelly Bob and a question from Chris Voss, and together they're questions about under 18s in esports, both as players and how they're being protected, but also around gambling, and especially for young people in esports. And I know, Malcolm, this is something that you've discussed before about gambling in esports. So we'll start with you there.
I think esports just needs to be very, very aware of the fact that it has a young and impressionable audience, which regrettably the gambling industry will be taking a very keen interest in. We've already seen things like the impact of loot boxes, and I was asked as a business if we wanted to get involved in a global network of technical companies working in areas of sport and esports, which there are about 1,400 companies that took part or tried to participate. We were one of 100 that was accepted on it, and actually ended up withdrawing from it because the volume of gambling companies circulating was just really quite disconcerting. So gambling sees esports as a massive opportunity, and so I guess it's almost back to the panel in terms of what can we all do to ensure that, particularly at a kind of a regional level, I think it's going to be very difficult to stop at a professional level, but what can we do at a community level to ensure that young people are not drawn into seeing opportunities through gambling as a quick way out of issues that they may have in their lives. So I think it's, I don't want to put too much downer on this. I'm just saying there is a lot of interest in esports, and we've got to get those checks and balances in place to make sure that the most vulnerable are not drawn into that net. And
I don't want to put you on the spot, but I want to come to Sam about this one, because you're head of partnerships at NSC, and they are students, so they're not under 18s, but that trickles down. And from a partnerships perspective, how do you see corporations, both leagues but also esports companies, kind of negotiating the interest that is coming in from betting companies?
Yeah, so we have we're actually we're in a great position as NSC, and what we've built and working with the students directly, that actually we can pick and choose really which brands we work with, and work with them really on an activation that enriches the student esports experience, and delivers value back to that community. In terms of kind of like gambling and betting brands getting involved in esports, a lot of the IP rights holders, like Riot, have limitations in license agreements on those companies sponsoring any tournaments from the grassroots level all the way through to the top tier, and exceptions have to be made and looked at individually. But to raise a quick point on that, no one owns football as a whole. If you want to go run a football match at your local park, you can do it without getting approval from the FA. But from an esports point of view, people own the titles within esports. People have created and developed, and the publishers own the rights to any IP there. So they hold that. Part of my role is getting these licenses agreed with the publishers themselves, and with that comes restrictions on what you can and can't do. So there is some safeguarding at that level, but there's also safeguarding at our level as well.
Mhm.
And I've just realised that to the audience, I was
Yeah.
muted for that question, so I'm just gonna say that one out loud again. Is that we had a question from Elise about how university societies are doing a really good job of building up a reputation for individuals in society, but also society themselves, and how do they see that continuing to go forward?
So I think, it's a bit of a loaded question. I don't think you can easily. Just reading the question again. Okay. I think, we're becoming much more recognized. I think there was a huge gap for university esports for a while. Places like NSC from 2017 have fixed that, but I think it's more about helping organizations and larger ones within the industry realize that that's where you're getting your players and your connection. So I think there is a gap at the moment for filtering university students into the industry. We have huge organizations and tournaments for the industry and for university, but we don't quite have that filtering in. I think there's NISA, which is the Alumni Association for Esports. They're just trying to start filtering university students into the actual industry. But I think the way that we can connect societies to the industry is just, I think, work with the current organizations that are there. So working with NSE, working with the other one, which is quite a similar one, which is Newell. We work with them as well. Just about getting the names out there. University is a great place to start for esports, university esports, because there are so many people that played as teenagers, like me, for example, played casually and then didn't really realize they could play, and now are transferring into it as an actual career choice for a lot of them. So I think it's just about making it more mainstream is the way that I would say we should connect with organizations the best, would be making it seem as more of a mainstream thing. I think not taboo, but I think it's still a bit of a people don't really realize the scope of the industry well enough at the moment. We're definitely improving, like, BT being here, for example, definitely an improvement. But I think a lot of people, it's just making it more mainstream, making it more normalized. A lot of people still see it as just gaming. And I think realizing that there is huge potential here for the entire industry would be the best way for us to reach them. I have just submitted a internship application, for example, which is really exciting for me. I never thought I'd be able to, from just playing games in my free time to now submitting internship applications at these kind of organizations. So I think it's just about advertising better what is available and the value of these organizations, I think, is the best way. Yeah.
And I want to bring this across to
Piggyback.
Sam. Yeah.
I was gonna say, so we've got yes, we run a university esports championship, which is great, but we also have resources available for those looking to get involved in esports and gaming as a career. So we work with Intel on the Intel Future Gen program. It's a talent identification program that identifies future leaders at university who want to get involved in esports and gaming, which is great for those 10 students that are picked. But actually, we have hundreds of applications a year. So we make a lot of the resources and content available to everyone, so they can benefit from it. So if you go to nse.gg, on the left-hand side, there's an Intel Future Gen hub. If you look at this year's program, I'd really encourage you to look at Malf Min's talk about the esports industry and how it all works and all the different companies involved. It's a great overview of the esports ecosystem. And also, when you are applying for internships and jobs within the industry, really lean on your esports society involvement, and think beyond the typical. I've got team building skills because I was part of an esports team. That's great, but you've done so much more as being part of that esports society. Whether you worked on the broadcasting side, whether you worked as a treasurer, you've got financial literacy skills there, whether you've worked on marketing and social and comms for that society. Treat it as almost that you've worked for a startup business and you've got these skills and trying to apply them to the applications. I think that's what a lot of students miss when they are applying for these jobs.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm happy you kind of discussed that, because also in terms of when you're a student and getting, the classic joke about getting a job as a graduate in the current industry is that they want and they create entry level jobs, but they also want experience. So how does that entry level job work, right? Like that's the joke, the conundrum that everybody has to deal with. And one way you can do both is come in as an entry level person but still have experience is through your society, because it is effectively an esports organization. It is like a startup. I think it's a really good way of describing what the students are doing. And Katie, yourself, you're embedded in that and high up in that, so that gives you credit to all of that as well. And with that in mind, in terms of using your time at university, it will come to what will have to be our last question, and I'm going to take Alex's, which is some people are concerned about splitting your priorities as someone who's embedded in esports, but also I guess we can also include this in, is it impeding on your studies, and or what if you want to be a pro player, how is it going to impede you if you stream as well as play, instead of just practice behind closed doors? And I'll come to Sue on that one first, because actually Sue put out a podcast yesterday where they're talking about becoming how to get involved in esports and become a player, and a lot of discussion was around streaming, but also generally just around being nice. So we'll go from there.
That's a really good question, actually, and it's something that so my other half is a pro Valorant player. He gets asked this quite a lot because in the off season, which is right now, he will stream very consistently, and obviously once Valorant comes back and the competition comes back, you just can't stream as often as you would like. I think you as a person, you have to be able to manage expectations and also know your own priorities. So if your goal is to go pro, honestly, streaming has to take a backseat. Like it just you're going to be scrimming 8 hours a day and practicing with your team and so on. You simply just don't have the resources and the time to stream. I know some pro players balance that a lot better than others, but it's completely up to you. I think if you are someone that enjoys the content side of things, I'm sure you'll make time for it. But I think if your goal is to be pro, and I think most pro players will tell you this, that they will put the competition and the practice and the scrimming ahead of everything else, sometimes even their own health, which I really don't recommend. The balance needs to be there. But in terms of university, I actually have a little bit to say here, just because I host a university Valorant league. It's a weekly league during term times. And a lot of those players, they scrim and play outside of their own times. But of course, during the pandemic, when you'd usually be maybe like heading to the student union for some society stuff, some socials and so on, which you can't during a pandemic, I think they've subsidized that with playing Valorant and training outside of competition time. And I think it's been a really healthy balance for them, actually, because as you guys would know as well, being a university, you don't want to just be full on like kind of burn yourself out with studying. You do also need to do other things as well. And as Sam said, like a wide set of interest is definitely going to help you. I mean, for example, some of the Rick's GG players who are an organization in the UK, they're still at university, but they're playing pro Valorant just in their spare time. And even if you don't go very far with that, graduating and being able to kind of show someone that you were literally signed to an organization when you were at uni is super impressive. And I think, contrary to popular belief, I think it really depends on the kind of person you are, how much time you want to put in. It's with anything, really. If you have other hobbies, I think you'd be able to manage that pretty well yourself. And I actually do encourage a lot of people to kind of venture into those things whilst you're at uni, because you're going to have more opportunities to do so. And obviously, like, prioritize your studies. Like, don't kind of neglect your degrees and stuff. But if there are really cool opportunities either run by a uni or run by, organizations like the NSC and so on that you can participate in, I 100% think it's a really, really worth your time, even if you don't want anything to do with esports afterwards, because once you graduate, you will not have those kind of opportunities. Like, there's not going to be organizations and structures for you to be able to just hop in and compete and play a league,
Yeah, and we don't have too much time left, but I'm so happy you mentioned even if you're not going into esports, the power of esports prior. And to round that out, I wanted to kind of pose that as a quick question for Tim in terms of as an employer or someone who may be in the position, looking at applications from time to time. I don't know actually whether you do or not, but in that position, if you see, how do you see kind of that role of having multiple things on your CV? What's valuable, and how do you think esports could kind of fit in if you're not actually going from this esports experience at university to then going into esports? How do you see that valuable from going from an esports experience at university to traditional employment?
I think it's very valuable, actually. And speaking from personal experience here, I originally did an electrical engineering degree. I joined a telecoms organisation. I've worked in telecoms, and I actually had very little to do with gaming until about 3 or 4 years ago. And one of the things I needed to do was get up to speed extremely quickly. And I looked at our base of graduates within the organisation, and basically got one of them to teach me everything that he knew about gaming and esports, in return for me teaching him everything I knew about telecoms. But it's a brilliant grounding. You come into an organisation, you're seeding experience. You have an experience that probably the rest of the people in the organisation don't have. Everybody comes with their own view. So it's incredibly valuable for me. Yeah.
Cool. And thank you. So that's pretty much all we have time for. So I'll hand over to Rachel. And I want to give a big thank you to everybody on this panel. I really appreciate this, and I think the conversation's been so interesting, and hopefully I can get some time to chat with you all about these sorts of things again in the future. But for now, it's goodbye to this lot, and I'm going to hand over to Rachel. So thank you all, and remember there is another talk coming up with the Warwick Enterprise, which Rachel will tell you some more about.
I've learned so much listening to the different perspectives, and what strikes me is that we're all learning about this at the same time, and long may that continue. So there are a few themes that kind of were weaved throughout the responses that the panel gave. The first came out really strongly, which was around well-being. And actually, this was one of the conditions of our investment. The university really wants us to focus around education around well-being and gaming as part of the launch of our esports centre. We also had themes about infrastructure and 5G, diversity, the parallels and cross-fertilization and innovation between sports and esports, the importance of seeing the opportunities, taking an inclusive approach to the overall business of esports, and then some really strong themes around community, participation, and also identity. So just to quote some of our panels, so in the words of Malcolm, there are exciting times ahead for esports. Yinsu, thank you so much for raising the issue around gender challenges, and I absolutely agree that we need to keep working at it. Tim, I really hope you get your jersey, and actually the next time we see you, you're wearing it. And Katie, the phrase that will stay in my mind is, I really need good ping. And I wonder if I'll ever actually say that, but it's certainly kept with me. And Sam, highlighting those key considerations when developing career trajectories for students and graduates is really important. And we need much more of that as we open our centre. So thanks again to our panel and Jack for hosting the conversation. More information at esports@warwick.ac.uk. So please reach out to us if you'd like to work with us. Thank you so much.